want to get into Ben Johnson. This is going to be the last topic. It might go, obviously, a little bit over 10 a.m., but this is a big one. And I'm going to start with a video of this former Jacksonville Jaguar talking about Ben Johnson and the potential for Ben Johnson going to Jacksonville as the next head coach. Now, former Jaguars offensive lineman Greg Huntington was speaking on the 1010XL radio show this week, where he made a massive claim in regard to Ben Johnson's desire to have the Jaguars job. Now, his source, well, it was none other than the former Jaguar quarterback and legend of the Jaguars and current Detroit Lions quarterbacks coach, Mark Brunell.
You know, the reason I reached out to you the other day to have me come on your show is the connection that I do have with Mark Brunell.
Sure.
And we stay in contact. We text and we call. And after Detroit destroyed the Jaguars, I texted Mark. I said, move heaven and earth to convince Ben Johnson to take this job if it becomes available.
Yeah.
And then we talked. I mean, we actually talked on the phone together. And he said, look, Ben Johnson wants that job.
Mm-hmm.
He likes the idea of Trevor Lawrence. And, of course, if Ben were to come, Mark's going to follow. They're very close. I mean, he's his offensive coordinator. He would be the quarterback's coach here in Jacksonville for Trevor Lawrence.
Right.
I said, well,
but you don't think he'd be the offensive coordinator?
No.
You don't?
Out of his own mouth, he just said he's not cut out for that. Now, maybe he could see differently. But why can't Ben Johnson call the plays?
Well, that's just it. I think that Mark would be the offensive coordinator by definition, but you want Ben Johnson calling the plays. Right. Because if this thing does turn around and all of a sudden people start calling for Mark Brunell and say, we want you to become the head coach of our team, you still want it to be okay where it's Ben Johnson who's calling plays. I look at it like a situation going back 20 years ago with Sean Payton and Drew Brees, that you can lose coordinators, you can lose position coaches, but it's Sean Payton, Drew Brees, the combination of the play caller and the performer. That's the way it's got to be. I don't want Ben Johnson coming here handing the offensive coordinator and play calls to Mark Brunell or anyone else. I want Ben Johnson coming here calling the plays.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, for sure. And again, you know, and I want to make sure that I cover Mark appropriately in the sense that, you know, he thinks the world of Dan Campbell.
Okay.
And enjoys his position there as a quarterback coach. But he definitely said, I'll follow Ben Johnson.
Yeah.
If he comes to Jacksonville. I said, well, what if he goes to the Raiders? He goes, I'll stay in Detroit. Simply because Vegas is too far away from Jacksonville.
Right.
Because, you know, he commutes back and forth and his wife. And so, but that was encouraging to hear. And you know, of course, you don't know what to believe these days when you see stuff, you know, on your phone or something about, oh, it's already a done deal, but, you know, with Ben Johnson and you're talking behind. I don't know any of that. What I do know from Mark Brunell, who obviously is a 100% reliable source, is that Ben Johnson wants this job if it becomes available.
Yeah.
And you look, I like Doug Peterson.
Okay. That's a lot to chew on right there. So Huntington, obviously a former NFL player, former Jag, has a really good relationship with Mark Brunell. And I think it's far from any surprise to see, you know, any word of Johnson wanting to become the Jaguars head coach, considering, you know, the appeal of Trevor Lawrence, the state of the roster, the weakness of the AFC South, the emergence of Brian Thomas, who they just selected this last season. And look, they've got state-of-the-art facilities. They've got an extremely wealthy, owner. They're going to be upgrading the stadium. And again, it's one of the most wealthiest and most patient owners in sports, which is Shad Khan. Now, Huntington noted that his source, like I said, is none other than Mark Brunell, and that they actually had a conversation about this. Started with a text, moved to a phone call, and it was after the Jaguars, got smoked by the Lions, and he gets on, starts talking to Brunell, saying, look, you got to move heaven and earth to get Ben Johnson to come down here. Now, he was the greatest quarterback in franchise history, Mark Brunell, for the Jags. And I think that's the largest part of the report here, is that Brunell, not only has he coached with Johnson in Detroit since 21 and has likely grown really close with Ben Johnson, but if Johnson were to come to Jacksonville, would Mark Brunell join him? Now, Mark Brunell's family is in Jacksonville. That's where they stayed. And, there was a question, like they had mentioned, well, what if he goes to the Raiders? Well, Mark Brunell said he'll stay in Detroit because that's just too far of a commute between Jacksonville, and the Raiders facility, because of his family. So I won't read you the quote again, or let me read you the quote again. So the former teammate, Huntington, he said this. He said the connection that he has with Mark Brunell, and we stay in contact. We text, and then I would call. And then after Detroit destroyed the Jaguars, I texted Mark. I said, move heaven and earth to convince Ben Johnson to take this job if it becomes available. Now, when stating how Brunell and Huntington's relationship is, kind of the status that it is, right? It's the basis of this whole conversation that really kind of got me going. There's some ties here. And so then he went on to say, we talked on the phone together, and he said, look, Ben Johnson wants that job. He likes the idea of Trevor Lawrence. And of course, if Ben were to come, Mark is going to follow. They're very close. Now, later in the program of this show, this morning show, or whatever it was, he asked why this works. And this is where Huntington kind of acknowledged how it's hard to know what to believe when, this kind of stuff comes across your phone or comes across a headline. But he also considers the fact that Mark Brunell he's solid, right? He's 100% legit, and he's a solid source. And so he went on to say that, he would be the quarterback's coach here in Jacksonville for Trevor Lawrence. Of course, again, you don't know what to believe these days when you hear or see stuff, on your phone or something, about, it's already a done deal. And he went on to say that he doesn't know that it's a done deal. He also gave credit to Dan Campbell, saying that Mark Brunell, loves his job, loves working with Dan Campbell. So it's not about that, right? And then he said, lastly here, what I do know from Mark Brunell, who obviously is a 100% reliable source, is that Ben Johnson wants this job if it becomes available. This conversation happened the day before Peterson got fired, or it happened that morning before Peterson got fired. Now, here's the caveat to this whole thing. Khan, the owner of the Jags, did not fire Trent Baalke. Now, during Monday's postmortem press conference, this is what I mentioned earlier, where Shad Khan and Baalke were on this Zoom call, and he kind of spoke real candidly about the possibility of still firing Baalke this offseason. He was asked if the incoming head coach wanted other changes to the organization on the condition that he took the job, such as improving the medical staff or the front office. Khan responded by saying in so many words that he was open to whatever needs to be done. Not really a quote there, but I'm summarizing that in so many words, that's what he said. That was his answer. So now comes the question. Will Ben Johnson push to have Ray Agnew installed as the GM and bring along Mark Brunell as the quarterback coach? And God knows who else is being groomed at this point inside the walls of Allen Park. So if that happens, and I wouldn't be surprised if it does, I certainly expect Ray Agnew to become a general manager of a team this year. And I do understand that Jacksonville is a better fit for Brunell and certainly for Johnson as far as the roster, the cap space. They have about $35 million before any additions from the NFL. And then, that could possibly grow to $60 million. And then they also have a top 5 draft pick this year, and they have all 7 rounds in the 2025 draft. So in my opinion, I think that this is becoming more of a perfect opportunity for Ben Johnson. And I think that Ben Johnson is absolutely going to push to have a new general manager installed, because if it's not working now, why would it work later with Baalke, who has not shown the ability to turn this team around, even with, the picks that they brought in and the type of players that they have on that roster. They have not been able to turn it around and clearly haven't been able to work cooperatively with the head coach. So Ray Agnew, in my opinion, he's a perfect fit. Look, he was he professional? What was he with the Rams? He was the player personnel with the Rams. Obviously came to Detroit as the assistant GM. He's got a ton of history. He's been working hand in hand with Brad Holmes. He knows Brad Holmes, method. And I think that that's an absolute perfect opportunity. So that's what I wanted to share this morning. And then I've got one other thing that I want to share on a team that is snubbing Ben Johnson.